Hello, everybody. It's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today, I have the pleasure to once again be joined by Volker Bertelmann. And on today's episode, we will focus on his Academy Award winning score to All Quiet on the Western Front. It is my pleasure to welcome Volker Bertelmann.
Hi, Michael.
It's great to have you on my show again. Thank you very much,
Thank
Volker. I really appreciate it. I hope you're doing
Mhm.
well.
Yes, absolutely.
When did you realize you wanted to get into film scoring? I know that many people say it is basically impossible to get into film scoring unless it just happens by accident. You know, you meet somebody who works in this line of work, and then by happenstance you end up working in film music. Others may agree or disagree. How did it happen in your case?
Well, in my case, I have to say that I was always moved by film music, and there was always a wish, in a way, maybe a secret wish of getting into film work in a way, but there was never like a constant connection to people that were asking me or where I had the opportunity to do it. So in a way, there was one film music that I did when I was 18 with a friend of mine. We had a band together, and we did the music for a German series called Ein Fall für zwei, which was a crime series. And but it was just for one episode, and that and after that, there was no connection again. My friend, whose parents were the directors of that film, they continued working with him, and I was lost. I was left over. So I had to find something else, and there was plenty of different things that I was interested in terms of music. So I did other things, and then it occurred to me at some point in my mid-20s that I wanted to start again, and so I reached out to some production companies, and that was also not very successful. And I would say the most successful thing for me was that directors came to my concerts, and then they asked me after the show, could you imagine to do the music for my film, because I think they were moved, or there was something in the film that made them think that I could do it. But when you look at the job in general, it's a complete different thing, because you need a lot of other qualities than just writing music like you do for your record.
And you just mentioned your concerts because some people may or may not know that you also have a pseudonym. You're also called Hauschka, and you also release music under that name, but your legal
Mm.
name, of course, is Volker Bertelmann.
Mm.
There was a kind of transition from Hauschka to Volker Bertelmann. Also, when you released some scores a couple of years earlier, it was Hauschka or Volker Bertelmann, aka Hauschka, and now you
Mm.
release the scores under your legal name.
Mm.
And how did you, Volker, experience the transition into film scoring? Because most people would say that film composition and film scoring is an entirely different beast and animal than, let's say, other types of music. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of similarities, and if you can, if you create your own music, it's a very, I would say, it's a big advantage to have an own sound world, because it makes you much, faster in working, because you have always, I mean, I'm always creating in a way, and it doesn't matter if it's a soundtrack or like a score for a film, or if it's my record. I'm just starting the recording machine, and I play on top of something. So it's in a way the creative process is in a way similar, and it needs a drive, an inner drive. But when I was nominated with Dustin O'Halloran for the Oscar in 2017 for the film Lion, I had the feeling that his name, well, he used his own name, and I was still using my band name. which was for the records a good name, but for the soundtracks, I had the feeling it's different because people don't really know what Hauschka is, if it's a woman or a man or if it's a group or so there was always this kind of, yeah, what is this, something like that. And so I had the feeling it might be helpful to release the soundtracks under my real name and also disconnect Hauschka from Volker Bertelmann a little bit, because then I also can release soundtracks under a different name rather than my band name, because I'm doing more soundtracks in a year than albums. So at some point my whole account of my band was swamped by soundtrack releases, and so whenever I released a record, I was searching for it, for example, under Spotify, because I was like, where's my album? And then I realized, oh, it's on number 10 or something, like very low in the dungeons. And that is not was not my intention. When I want to release the record, of course, I want to have the intention of everyone saying, hey, Hauschka has released a new record. So to cut a long story short, I needed a recipe to divide those two. And I think that has arrived.
I know that many of your peers operate from the United States, or they live in Los Angeles or New York, and you live or still live in Germany primarily, as I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been tempted to relocate to Los Angeles to be a little bit closer to the industry, or is that completely out of the question, if I may ask?
Well, I mean, that is not it is actually out of the question in terms of, I actually think that I can benefit from the disconnect, and not because I don't want to be close to the people. They are very nice and interesting people, but for me, living in a different place also gives me the distance of getting into the place and, and being full on. And I feel for my energy, it's much better. Even if I would live in the US, I would have maybe not live in the same town where everything is about film. I would rather move to the whatever, like the countryside, or, to a little bit further out place, because I'm also tempted to live in nature. And I love actually quietness. And I need to be in a forest or something every now and then, just to clear my head and not having any kind of noise around me. And that is not something that I do on vacation. I need that, I would say, regularly in my daily life. So for me, I think it's much more, my life is maybe much more a travel life between like locations, and I'm staying for a certain while in one location and I'm going back, and then I go back again. And honestly, the logistics of working on a film in the US, that's not a problem to work there. And I have places to stay there. I can work there, so there's no for me, no big difficulty, to go over to the US and work there.
Yeah. And I think also technology enables you these days to work from wherever you want, basically. And I know that, Daniel Pemberton, for instance, he lives in the UK, he works from the UK. Alexandre Desplat, he lives in France, he works out of France. Lauren Balfe, he returned to the UK. So it's not a prerequisite to live in the United States in order to be successful in this industry.
No, it's also, I think since Corona, we found out that also it maybe even gives you every now and then an advantage to actually record remotely, or because it saves you a lot of time. You can actually, while the orchestra is recorded, you don't have to go somewhere beforehand. You don't have to relocate. You can get straight away the mixes into, or the recordings right in the mix. And of course, I love social connections and being with everyone in the room and doing my thing, but also a lot of recordings that are made for US productions are made in London. So for me, from Düsseldorf to London, that's a 50-minute flight. That's faster than I can drive in Germany to a recording studio. So and I can go in the morning, record something in London, and fly back in the evening to be at home. So
Yeah, yeah,
that is not a big problem.
yeah, that's a valid point. But even if you were to drive to Berlin from Düsseldorf, it would be way more than 1 hour. So basically,
Right, and and it's also, I mean, London has the best players and the best sound. So in a way, if you wanna, of course, it's a question of budget, but in the end, if you want to find, a really beautiful sound, it's always great to record in London.
absolutely, they have some of the finest players, be it Abbey Road or Air Studio. So
Yeah.
it's an amazing sound. Yeah, it's really
It
good.
is an amazing sound and a very professional and wonderful place. I mean, you get people that are not stressed too much, in their work, and when they're stressed, they are still you can rely on them. So mostly, I'm very. I mean, of course, I'm interested also to bring those qualities, to Germany, or at least in certain areas to benefit from my experience now that I have over the last couple of years. And I would say my team here in Düsseldorf, they are already profiting from it because they learn how to work with, big production companies and big film companies, and they know how to communicate, they know how to do the timing. So there's a lot of benefits for us as well, and maybe one day I will have an orchestra in Düsseldorf or whatever. I'm not sure.
Great. And Volker, where did you record most of score to All Quiet on the Western Front? Did you do it in Germany exclusively?
No, no, no. I recorded. I mean, I mostly record all the small settings, like piano. I mean, piano I record anyways in my studio. All the string instruments, solo string instruments, I record here in my studio, and everything like percussion, things that can be made, can be recorded in one room, where you need like the very precise and like very close miking, which I really love in a way. I really like to record things first, like dry, to get a kind of also the texture of it so that it's not lost in the reverb of the space. And also here, I have the opportunity to record one day a snare drum. Just for example, the snares that are in the score for All Quiet are all, are recorded. Some of them are recorded here. And I think I recorded the whole day, different snares. I tried things out. I worked on different ways of hitting it, putting material on it, and to do that in a studio eats a lot of time and it costs a lot of money in a big studio. So I did that in my place here, and the big string sections and everything that is like brass or like the bigger size things, I recorded at Air with the LCO, London Contemporary Orchestra, and it was all orchestrated by Rob Ames, who's the conductor, and yeah, and we had a great time to work on it, and I mean the harmonium, which is mainly one of the main instruments in the score, was also recorded here. Because there I could also try to find, sounds, to get this kind of sound that you have at the beginning of the score of All Quiet, like the very first three-note motive, which is the harmonium. To find that kind of sound needs quite some exploration, and because when you play things and you want to experiment, there's always either the sound is good or what you played is good, but if to have both, to work on the sound and what you played, and in my case that is very closely connected, you need an own space to experiment, to to set up the microphones right where you want to have them. You don't have anybody between you and the sound, so you can say you don't have to tell somebody, hey, can you move the microphone from left to right, maybe a meter away, something like that. That also always implements that you feel maybe at some point a little, oh, maybe I'm a little too picky, or and then you start compromising your idea. So in a way, have an own space is most important.
Great, thank you, Volker. And you just mentioned the harmonium and also the three-note motif, which basically opens the score, and it is featured in the first track on the album also.
Mhm.
If one didn't know it was a harmonium, the first instrument that came to mind would probably be a synthesizer, because
Mhm.
it sounds quite synthetic, or it sounds
Mhm.
electronic, but you actually use the harmonium, and as I understand, you had to distort it a little, or to manipulate it a little. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah, no, I distorted it not a little. I distorted it quite heavily. But the quality of the sound is has some synth quality, but to get actually the bassy element, and the air that is in there, that is very hard to get with a synthesizer. And the interesting thing is that people are asking me, what kind of synthesizer is that? And that question already shows it's not really clear. So somebody who listened to it is not really sure if it's a synthesizer, or some are saying it's a brass instrument, or what is it. And I think that is something that I really love about that sound, because at the end it creates questions and it raises interest. It raises interest for what it is. And so when I went back from the first screening of the film, I wanted to have something. Well, I listened, of course, to all the explosions and all that. Like a lot of sound was already in there, that was very loud, and I was thinking, how can I shine through with my music? Specifically, if I'm only using string instruments, that's not cutting through. String instruments are mostly blends, and of course, they can also be very low and edgy. But I always felt like, no, I don't want to have string instruments. I need more like something that has air in it. But I didn't want to use brass. So in the end, I found in my head, I was like, oh, maybe the harmonium could be something. And also the harmonium is from that time. The one that I had is from my grandmother, and it's actually the one that I would say was standing around 1900 in their living room, being used for accompanying Bach pieces or chorals. So the only question was, does it have enough bass? And on the registers of the harmonium, it says double bass. So when you take one register out and you press one key, it adds an octave lower to the note. And I tried that, and I was like, yeah, that's rougher than a sawtooth from a from a synthesizer. So I used that, and I just put it through like a heavy distortion and boosted the bass. And here we go. That's it. Nothing else.
Great, Volker. And how did you actually land on this three-note motif? Because as I understand, Edward Berger, the director, asked you to come up with a score or a sound which sounds unlike anything you had done before.
Mhm.
So how did you react to that? Because that's quite a directive, be unlike anything you had done before. That opens the door for many, many possibilities.
Well, that at least cuts away all the things that you have already heard. So, and that's maybe the main aspect of it, because of course you can do for a war movie, you can do a kind of score that you would think about, like the typical action, dark kind of score.
Mhm.
But at the same time, that was something that Edward didn't want, and he's much more a person. And I can guarantee the next movie I will do with him, he will say the same thing again. So I can't do All Quiet twice, which I think is great, because that also opens a challenge for me, to not getting lame and then reproducing the things again and again. And of course, every composer, I would say, comes or has these situations where people are requesting something that you've already done, and they want that again and over again. But this is also some baggage that you have to carry because you want to invent yourself again. And so the three note motive was something that was not coming out of the idea of doing something different, because at the same time, when somebody tells you, you should do something that you've never done before, in a way, you start in the same way as you do every score. You have to play some notes, and you have to create, and it can happen that while you are creating, suddenly you realize, oh, that sounds like the score of that and that film. So let's cut it. So in that case, what I'm doing mostly is I'm creating um, a lot of tracks. I'm sitting on the instrument, and I'm just working. I'm recording, and then I go through all the things that I recorded, and I look what could work as an idea. So I'm not cutting off my intuitive composition in a way. Um, I just let it run and let it flow in a way, and then I'm going back and think about it and maybe cut something out. And so this note motive was a two note motive, and the last note, the F, was somewhere else, and that was the lowest note that I heard, which is actually the lowest note on the harmonium. And so I just moved them together. I cut them out, like a little bit like working with the scissors on a paper, and just pulled them together. And then I felt like, oh, this could be a nice, this is a nice motif. So I would love to work with that.
Great. Thank you, Volker. And I'm curious as to how you came up with the idea to use the snare drums. What do the snare drums represent and or symbolize? Did you use them because it is connected with a certain military sound, or what was the idea behind those?
Well, of course, the snare can represent a military sound, and of course, it was always used as a tam-tam drum in a marching band. So, um, of course, the first initial idea could be that they are running and there is a ram ta ta tam ta ram ta ta tam ta, underneath. But we had the feeling, and that was one of Edward's notes that he gave me before I started, that he wanted to have a snare drum played by somebody who can't play the snare, so that it's much more like a disruptive element, that it's not like, you know, beautifully made. It needed it is more like an event that comes in like cutting through the picture as a kind of, what is this? Why is that? And also used as a symbol for the war machine, getting into these young men's heads, and at the same time being irritating you because you're like, what are they doing? I mean, are they, don't they think about it? And the snare felt very, or these rhythmical elements felt really like a disruptive element. And so I had to find something that is not only sounding like a snare, which you can hear. It's not, you always think, what kind of drum is that? Because you have a snare hit, but then you have also the Bartok pits from the contrabass that are very percussive, as well as sometimes they sound nearly like a low bass drum, really rumbling. along, and then you have the Gran Casa, which I put a lot of rubbish on, and then when you bang the Gran Casa, all the rubbish flies up and it lands on the fur of the drum again, and then it creates this carpet of, this kind of delay after the hit. So I had this palette of percussive instruments, and sometimes I layered them, sometimes I used them single, and that made it very like variable, but at the same time also broken in a way. And yeah, so that was the longest. I was sitting the longest on these hits because they drove me at some point crazy, because I was always ending up with a normal traditional drum sound, and I'm like, no, I don't. I wanted something else, and then I had to fight a little bit to get this sound in myself.
And All Quiet on the Western Front doesn't necessarily sound like a traditional war movie score, if there is such a thing, because there are so many different ones and their sounds different. They don't necessarily sound alike. I mean, Black Hawk Down doesn't sound anything like Thin Red Line or Saving Private Ryan. So basically, you had to, let's say, tackle it from an entirely different angle. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to tackle every score from a different angle. Even though it's sometimes you don't reach that, you are sometimes looking back at your scores and you're like, I I didn't tackle it from a different angle. I just, in a way, replaced, or this score could also be, look 10 years before, there's this score and this score, and it's very similar, or it has similar elements. But at least you start with something where you want to be challenged and where you want to do something differently. And I would say with this film, because it is so brutal and it has so much, reality or realism in it, it was easier because I could use the music in a much different place, and it could create like a religious feel every now and then that was maybe helping the film also to connect with humanity and with with the wish of going back and maybe changing the decision and being back with your family and your sisters and brothers, and but that is never happening in the film. But at least the music could pretend that there is something out there waiting for you. So I think that is, for example, a very important element, as well as it was the announcement of the war machine that mostly starts before the war machine happens. So it creates this kind of tension where you just feel like, oh shit, now things are happening. So in a way, that film gave me a lot of freedom in terms of that. But sometimes you have films that are, and I'm not saying that negatively, it's just because of the how the film is set. It needs sometimes a traditional score, and that's nice. And I love traditional scores in how they are. But this film gave me a chance to work differently.
Yes. And one might say that the three note motif kind of symbolizes the brutality of war and the horrific aspects and the fear of the soldiers and the combatants when they prepare for war. And they also, and your score also features some quieter moments when you use the violin, for instance, in order to, I think, in order to emphasize the human aspect of reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I also used in those moments as well the three note motif, but just in variations to connect somehow, the, let's say, the brutal element of it with more with humanity, and with also, I mean, everyone who lives on Earth as a human has the feeling of the limitation of lifetime. And so in a way, when you see those boys running with 18 into their, into their grave in a way, of course you feel very sad for them, because dying with 18 is way too early. And so in a way, to give them a kind of hope in that they at least can share, for example, when they have this dinner together where they found a duck, and they cook it, and they talk with each other. That's, for example, a moment where you feel like, oh, that at least in their short amount of time that they have left, they experience something that is, friendship, warmth. And then they see a couple of women passing by, and that's like a hallucination in a way for them, because they suddenly realize, oh, we haven't seen them for a while. So in a way, the music can help with those moments, because it shifts the perspective into a dream or into something that is surreal, and music is very good in that.
Volker, I know that certainly film wise and score wise, you cannot please everybody. Many people would argue, well, the score is, depending on the film, the score is too melodic, or it's not melodic enough, or it uses synth design or sound design heavily. So I think it can be really tricky to figure out a way what's most appropriate and also important when it comes to finding the right tone for a score. How did you deal with that on that movie? Because it features lots of textures. It's not heavily melodic. Maybe you could elaborate on what you went through and your thought process was.
Well, I mean, the three note motive comes from the thought that I had the feeling that there's not much space to create these long lines. I would say specifically in the brutal areas, there was not much space to have long melody lines, because they would always be covered by explosions, by planes, by people running, shouting. And that is, for a score, I would say, not very helpful, because let's say you have a six note motive, and in the middle four or three are covered, then it's in a way a three note motive, but it's not meant to be one. So in a way, to think about that beforehand and say, let's start with the most minimal approach, but very significant, so that whenever these notes appear, that you are aware that there's something coming, and that you connect these elements with the film. And that was mainly my thought. But as we all know, thoughts can be great ideas, and then you start with it, and then suddenly it doesn't elaborate, or it doesn't unfold as a good idea. Or so in this case, I mean, that was on the day two. On the first day I saw the film the first time. On day two, I worked on that three note motive. And on the evening of day two, I sent it to Edward, asking, what do you think? And he was so positive, like, was even cheering in the phone and saying, hey, man, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So in a way, that was the main thought on those motives. And I had the feeling every time I want to play something longer, I wanted to have it as a variation of that three note motive, which luckily enough was working in a lot of ways.
Right. And Volker, did you actually revisit the book and or the first two film adaptations, or did you want to start with a clean slate?
Yeah, absolutely clean slide. I can't, I'm so such a fast absorber that I would rather stay away from any kind of music before I'm working on something, because whenever I like something, suddenly it's getting into my DNA, and I wanna stay away from that as long as I can. As well as, I mean, the book was something that I read when I was a kid, and it was still present, but it was present enough to, and I saw the film in such a um, already advanced cut that it wouldn't make sense to, to do a long research. I also, I'm not sure if long researches are always the most helpful. It's sometimes really just intuitive reaction to something that you see, and then you're like, okay, I'm doing this, bam, bam, and then, a lot of times you are already finding very quickly intuitive motives that are working, and then you have to take time afterwards to develop them. So you have to develop the themes, or how the themes in, I would say it's more difficult to adjust the tempo of themes, and the timing, so that there's enough breath or like gaps between the melody lines. I think that is the most difficult part that comes after you searched, or after you found your main motives, which are working maybe in one, let's say, on 100 BPM, but then you want to adapt that, or you want to adjust that to 80 or 75 in a scene. Um, I think that is sometimes for me difficult.
Great, thank you, Volker. And I would like to talk briefly about the Academy Awards, or award ceremony experience. I mean, you have won two major awards for All Quiet on the Western Front. You had won the BAFTA Awards, which is basically the British Film Academy Awards, and the Oscar, the Academy Award, just a couple of weeks ago. And how did you feel going into the Academy Awards? It wasn't your first Oscar ceremony, but do you even comprehend what's going on there, especially when they call your name and you walk onto the stage? Or is it so surreal and just a kind of sensory overload that it really takes several days to comprehend what you have achieved there?
Well, I think it's a mixture. I mean, I would lie if I would say, "Hey, no, I'm totally cool." I went up the stairs and I said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And then, then I got this golden thing in my hand, and then I walked backstage. No, it's um, I have to say, the experience of being nominated 2017 helped me so much more to enjoy the win in 2000, and now in this year, because I was already prepared a little bit more about what I have to expect. And so I didn't felt detached from myself. I think in 2017, I was a little bit, I didn't know what that is, and I felt like floating through something. And of course, you have people around you that help you. So as a composer, going to the Oscars, you always have a publicist next to you who helps you and tells you what to do. So there's not much, you don't have chaos in your head, like, oh, where should I go? Or where are the photos being made? Where do I have to, let's say, even where do I have to stand in front of the photographers? Where is the cross, or where is the point where I have to stand? All that is organized, and there is somebody who tells you that. And so once you experience that, then you know, okay, this is all be fine. The only thing that you learn from your first run is that the only thing you have to prepare is the speech. All the rest is totally fine. If you breathe normally and you drink enough water and you are warm enough, everything else is totally fine and you can get through it. But once your name is called, then the adrenaline hits your body, and then you have to be prepared so that you are not suddenly starting to stumble, or you fall over the stairs, or you know, because that moment, 200 million people are watching you, and I think that would be a very weird moment if that would happen. So, in a way, I prepared my speech, and I was pretty. I could even see the people in front of me, which is not always the case. That when you talk, that you recognize, There's him, there is her, there is my wife, there are my kids. So I could even see them. So I think I was in a good shape for that evening.
Great, and congratulations again, huge achievement. And
Thank you.
Volker, as I understand, you will also be scoring Edward's new movie, which is called Conclave, if I'm informed
Yes.
correctly.
Yep.
Great,
I do that. Yeah.
great.
Yeah. I can't really tell you so much, not because I'm not allowed to. I haven't seen anything yet. I think they've stopped. Well, they finished filming right now, and I think he's starting to cut at the moment. So with him and me, I think what we experience is that um, it's good that the film is in a good shape.
Whenever you start working on the film,
Mm.
do you like to write or come up with ideas right away, or do you need to, let's say, take a day or two off in order to really let it sink in? Or does it depend on the picture? How does that work usually for you?
No, I'm a person when I see something, I can't sit still. So I need to look at it, and then the first thing is I'm opening a session, put the picture into the session, and I'm starting to draft, or I'm going to the piano and I'm figuring a few things out. But then, I record maybe a few notes, and then I'm recording it, and then I let it there. And then the next day, maybe I do another very rough, outline. Sometimes I'm taking pieces that I've written already. Sometimes I'm taking pieces that I remember. Oh, that could work, or this instrument could work, this tempo could work, and then I throw them in, and I just see the picture with things that I maybe sometimes have already produced or pre-produced or from other films, just to get an idea or a sense of how I want to approach it. And sometimes I have an idea about already an instrument, or when I heard about something, an instrument where I feel like this could work, then I buy it, and then I experiment with it a little bit. So yeah, that's mainly how I start. And when I'm on fire, there's no day and no night.
So do you actually like to work around the clock if necessary, or do you kind of have certain boundaries? Do you prefer nighttime, daytime? Does it matter to you?
Yeah, I prefer daytime, but it doesn't matter. I also sometimes work until, let's say, the late evening, but not nighttime. I need sleep, and I'm feeling the best when I'm sleeping, between 6 and 8 hours. I would say six is already short. 8 hours is a good portion, and so I'm trying to rest 8 hours at least, sleeping wise. And before that, it's always good to get distance to your work, because the main problem is that if you are getting too caught up in your work, you lose your ability to judge certain things, and specifically the mistakes that you are making. And but when you are relaxed, and even sometimes I'm walking in the mornings and not go straight away into the studio, and come with different attitude in the studio, and then I'm opening it up. And a lot of times the first day, or let's say, when you I like actually finishing something in the evening. So, and that in a way also dictates how long I'm working.
Mhm.
It needs a balanced life in a way to also, if music suddenly becomes too important, you can't feel music in an adequate way. You always, it's suddenly something like you can't live without it in a way. And I mean, I'm music is a big part of my life, but I can always imagine if that I can find other things that are interesting me, and that make me happy, you know. So if it becomes an addiction, then it's not healthy. So I'm trying always to find, you know, other interests as well, so that I can go back to my instrument, and I'm happy to play it, you know.
Are you at liberty to disclose a thing or two about War Sailor?
You know, the director or the producer approached me to work on it. I was in the middle of All Quiet on the Western Front, but I had the feeling that it is a different type of war movie, because it's much more personal, like a personal family story, where I also felt the music is a complete different, handmade, more laid back music than you know, than on All Quiet on the Western Front. So yeah, then, you know, the films were somehow existing next to each other until the first, you know, shortlist, because both were on the shortlist. And then, and I think then the production company decided, after it was released and it was shown, I think in Norway, it's the most watched movie, because it has a lot of to do with their historical heritage. And so I think if you ask somebody in Norway, they know exactly what this film is. And I think for the international market, I think they tried to find a partner, and I think Netflix then said, "Why don't we cut it into a series and make it a little bit longer, but make it in the same, you know, in a way, make the film into a 3 episode series." And that's what they did. And they used the same music. Um, I had nothing to do.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just heard that it's now done, and that's it. So
Okay.
I made the music for the film, you
Okay.
know, and I think maybe they just cutted it into I'm not sure how long the episodes are, if they are 45 minutes, or because then I think the film itself has 2 hours and around 15 minutes or something. So maybe they just didn't have to even add some more music, some more
Okay.
footage to it.
What else is next for you?
I'm working right now on a film with Anthony Hopkins and Helena Bonham Carter, and it's a film called One Life. And yeah, I'm working on that one, which is very nice because it works a lot with, um, you know, with small instrument sections, which I really like after all the war sounds and all the heaviness. I'm much more working on a kind of more emotional, fragile kind of style. And but I think this week I might be finished with all the writing, and then by the end of April I will record again in at Air Studios, I guess, um, with the LCO orchestra. And yes, that's my this is one thing, and then I'm starting a documentary, which is also a different process, because in documentaries there is not so much music that is scene driven. It's much more like, you know, blends, and because there's so much you know, language involved. But I love actually to, you know, to shuffle ideas, so that I have maybe one half day I'm working on one thing, then in the afternoon I work on something else, or I record a cello, and I'm like, oh, why don't we do this film part as well? So I'm sometimes even in a recording, I'm working on 2 different ideas for something, which is which is great, because you always, even in the working process, you get distance to, you know, to what you are working on, and at the same time you fall in love again on the next morning. So
it keeps you on your toes basically, and you have a fresh approach. And I think that's a great way of working actually, and also in order to stay creative and in order to, let's say, keep the juices flowing, so to speak, creative juices.
No, totally. I think it's I'm much more a fan of flowing than to dig, and getting crampy. I rather let it unfold and give it some time, but only in portions. So if you revisit a certain piece of music, let's say a complicated piece, you need maybe a day of like really deeply working on it. Then you let it sink in and you wait a little bit, then you revisit it, and then you can understand the mistakes. If you do that on the same day, it never is 100%. It's always like 80. And I want to make sure that the cues are, in my perspective, 100% right, rather than 80.
Very well said. And Volker, is there anything else you would like to add about your career up until this point, or Edward Berger, or anything else that comes to mind before we wrap up for today?
No, maybe what I can say is that I finished a new album, which I did, before the awards, actually before the BAFTAs, because I had the feeling that if I will win, that maybe that will change a lot in my, in the traffic on my phone and all that. So I finished that album, and I'm really glad about that. Today I received the cover artwork of it, and I will release that in autumn, in October, around October, and then I will do a couple of shows all over the world, where I'm releasing, where, in a way, release concerts. Um, and I think that is also as well important for the music, for my film music, to have also these moments where I'm detaching from, sitting in the studio, where I can actually play on a stage. I can talk to fans or to people that are coming to the show. And yeah, that is something that I might want to add, because that, completes a little bit the picture of this year.
What's the album called again?
It's called Philanthropy.
And you will release it under the name Hauschka, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
under the name Hauschka on the label City Slang, which is also the home of Son Lux, by the way. So Son Lux and me were on the same record label, which is very nice.
Volker, thank you very much for taking so much time out of your busy schedule. I really appreciate that. And I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you did too.
Yes, absolutely, Michael. Thank you so much. And,
Great.
until next time.
Great. Thank you. Take care. Stay safe and healthy. Bye.
Bye bye.